today. So welcome everyone. My name is Rain Brown and I'm program manager with the Western Region Homeland Security Advisory Council. The Western Council, in partnership with the other regional Homeland Security Councils of Massachusetts, the Central Region, Southeast and Northeast regions, have developed this training series consisting of online learning modules and webinars to lead municipal officials through a holistic approach to creating a cyber secure environment. We built this training series using the Cyber Essentials Toolkit, which was issued by the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, also known as CISA. So today we have 4 panelists with us today, and I'd like to take a little bit of time here to introduce them. So we have Stephanie Helm, Captain, U.S. Navy retired, is the first director of Massachusetts Cybersecurity Center at the MassTech Collaborative. The MassCyberCenter enhances conditions for economic growth through outreach to the cybersecurity ecosystem while fostering resilience within the Commonwealth. Stephanie's a career naval officer. She served a 29-year as cryptologic information warfare officer, retiring with the rank of captain. Prior to joining MassTech, Stephanie served as a consultant with the U.S. Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, providing subject matter expertise in cyberspace, space, and information operations. Her work with the college focused on supporting wargaming efforts to integrate cyberspace operations into plans and operations. As a naval officer, Captain Helm held numerous leadership roles which focused on cyberspace operations and information operations, including as Deputy Division Director, Chief of Naval Operations in Washington, D.C. She served a tour at sea as the Deputy for the Commander, 2nd Fleet Striking Fleet in the Atlantic, and Captain Helm has served as the Commanding Officer of Naval Security Group Activity Norfolk and tours of duty with the U.S. Central Command in Tampa, Florida, the National Security Agency in Fort Meade, Maryland, and Naval Security Group commands in California, Italy, and Maine. She received her BA from the University of California and her master's from the U.S. Naval War College. So welcome, Stephanie, as one of our panelists. Next, I'd like to introduce Sam Curry. He's Chief Security Officer at Cybereason and is a visiting fellow at the National Security Institute. Previously, Sam was Chief Technology Officer and Chief Information Security Officer for Arbor Networks of NetScout, and was Chief Security Officer and Senior Vice President of Research and Development at MicroStrategy, in addition to senior security roles at McAfee and CA. He spent 7 years at the RSA, Security Division of EMC, where he was a distinguished engineer and fellow nominee as Chief Technologist and Senior VP of Product. Sam also has over 20 patents in security from his time as a security architect. He has been a leader in 2 successful startups and is a board member of the Cybersecurity Coalition, of SSH Communications, and of Sequitur Labs in the Internet of Things security space, in addition to a number of advisorships across the security spectrum. So welcome, Sam. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
And for Ron Ford, serves as the Cybersecurity Advisor and Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. Since 2017, Ron has served in this capacity. Ron has worked with CISA since 2008. Prior to joining CISA, Ron spent the first part of his career in cybersecurity at the Defense Information Systems from 2002 to 2008. Ron holds a master's in science from the University of Maryland and bachelor's in science in computer networking. Thank you, Ron. We're glad to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
And our next panelist is Seth Brevor. Seth is currently Director of Cybersecurity for the Massachusetts Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. Prior to this role, Seth spent 10 years as a senior advisor for cyber policy in the Office of the Secretary at the U.S. Department of State. In this role, he worked on a variety of cross-functional federal policies and projects aimed at implementing the U.S. vision for an open, secure, interoperable, and reliable cyberspace. In particular, he was involved in interagency policy coordination and strategy development for key cybersecurity and national security initiatives. Seth came to public service from the academic sector, where he received his PhD from UCLA, followed by postdoctoral work at Princeton and the University of Pennsylvania. Originally from Rhode Island, he received his bachelor's degree from Dartmouth College. So thank you, Seth, for being here.
Thanks, Ryan.
We're excited to have the four of you here today to talk with all of the folks who are attending. And in addition to our panelists, I just want to also call out a thank you to Austin Murray, Pete Peliquin, and Kevin Ham, who are my colleagues from the Northeast Central and Southeast Homeland Security Councils, who are here providing a little technical and behind the scenes support. So to get started today, what we'd like to do is just do a couple of quick polls to bring you folks a little more into participating with us here, and to also help us have an understanding of where you see yourself in your understanding of cybersecurity. So Austin, if you would put up that first poll for us, and people can just respond as they seem fit. Go ahead and put in your responses.
Rain, I assume you don't want panelists to also respond. That could bias the results, right?
Yeah, no, we don't want you guys. We just want to get an idea of where participants are at.
I didn't have the Sam Curry, I wrote the book.
Yeah, no, we didn't do that.
We didn't have that option.
All right. Anybody else who wants to respond? Some of that might be because we as speakers and hosts aren't participating, that we're not all showing up. So it looks like most people here are assessing themselves to be beginners, with a few novices and a few folks who are intermediate to advanced. So it's actually a pretty good spectrum of folks.
And the first two actually add up to half exactly, which is kind of neat.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Austin. And if you could go ahead and put up the second poll, which is asking folks to assess where you think your town or your organization's practices of cybersecurity are at. With a minimal, basic, intermediate to advanced. So pretty similar to what we saw from the individuals, but with a little more heavy in the basic to intermediate than with the minimal to advanced. Great. Thank you all for participating in those polls and letting us know where you stand. So today we're going to focus on the first 3 chapters or modules of the CISA Cyber Essential Toolkit. The chapters are yourself, your staff, and your systems. We have also developed the online modules that go with these training, with these chapters. So we hope that those of you who are here today have had the opportunity to go through these chapters, but don't worry if you haven't, and we'll provide links to them at the end today. And Pete, if you would, could you go ahead and put the PDF of the Cyber Essentials, the link to that in the chat so people can pull that up if they want to look in, but we'll have everything. I'm going to be sharing slides of each chapter as we go in, so you'll have that too to reference as we go on today. And the way this works, I'll introduce each chapter. I'll start the discussion off with a question to one of our panelists, and then they'll just go ahead and talk about that chapter a little deeper, taking us in through their conversation into the topic. And we'll do a Q&A at the end of each chapter. So if you have a question, please go ahead and either send it directly to Kevin. You'll find him in the chat listed as Kevin Ham. You can send it to him directly, or if you want, you can post it to all and we'll review the questions at the end of each module. So we will start with our first module, which is yourself, the leader. And I'd like to kick it off with a question to Stephanie first. And so Stephanie, what would you say to a leader who's not a cybersecurity expert? How can they make a difference?
Thank you, Rain, and thank you to the Homeland Security Councils for your support of cybersecurity, because we've been partnering at MassCyberCenter with you for the incident response workshops, and you guys have been great in helping us get the word out. And this is an important topic, I think. And I like the way that the toolkit is kind of structured, where it talks about, let's start with you. My background, which next time I'm going to have to edit the biography a little so that it isn't quite so lengthy, but I was reflecting about thinking about all the different people I had to explain what cyber is throughout my naval career, and then when I was working at the Naval War College. And if you're an IT specialist and you're comfortable, or you're working with cyber a lot and you're in your little group and you're talking about it, there's a lingo, a language, you kind of are comfortable, you understand the concepts, even if you're not the most technical person, you get to understand some of the background of the issues. I often had to explain when I was in the Pentagon, why should the Navy care about cyber operations? Why does it make a difference if you're running an aircraft carrier that there's a cyber thing going on? And it was very challenging a lot of times to make it relevant to somebody else's world and using language that they could relate to and wasn't the language I was comfortable with. And that happened, many times while I was in the Navy. And today at MassCyberCenter, when I'm talking with people, it's sort of like, yeah, cyber, that's the IT guy's job. So I really like that you have to start with you. If you're not in this community, do you recognize the value of cybersecurity? Well, probably you do, because you're listening to this webinar. But how can you make it more relatable to people who are not comfortable with cybersecurity and what some of the issues are? And that sometimes is requires you to kind of make a commitment to do some things personally to make sure that it kind of translates throughout your organization. So if you're the leader, one thing is, do you understand any of the language or the lingo? And if not, are you able to educate yourself, read an article? There are a lot of great podcasts that are online now that can make learning about a topic pretty painless. You can do it while you're cooking dinner, or maybe going on a run or something. You can listen to a podcast about cybersecurity issues, and you might get a better appreciation for some of the issues. If you're a leader, do you make time for cybersecurity for your organization? Is it on your calendar? Are you talking to the IT department or to your chief risk officer about what cyber threats might be facing your organization? Because people realize if you're spending a lot of time, you, the leader, are spending a lot of time on something, it must be something that you're interested in. And I was always one of those people that if it's interesting to my boss, it's got to be fascinating to me. I better learn a lot more about it, because my boss might suddenly ask me some questions about it and I don't want to be flat-footed on it. So, learning something about the language, putting some time on the calendar, bringing in your cybersecurity professionals to talk to them about what the challenges are. If they don't report to you directly, bring their, hierarchy, their chain of command in with you so that everybody can hear the conversation about what's going on in cybersecurity. All of that is, sort of that leadership role that allows people to take the tone from you. And if you are aware of cybersecurity, you don't have to be the expert, but you're aware of it and talking about it. That helps everybody else kind of bring up the interest level in the organization about the cybersecurity issues as they were there. That's what I think.
So Rain, this is Sam. I'll pile on and maybe encourage my fellow panelists to do so too. I agree with Stephanie. But just like as a leader, you don't have to be a finance expert to care about tax strategy. You don't have to be a manufacturer to care about how your assembly line works. You don't have to be a psychologist to care about HR. You don't have to be a cyber expert to be leading. You don't have to be the manager. I'd caution against the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Which is that we tend to think we're experts when we first learn something and it's exciting. But aside from that, you can lean in. And as Stephanie said, if your boss is mildly interested, you should be deeply interested. It's not management, it's leadership. And what I liked about this is it made it approachable, this module. And Stephanie's spot on. You can learn this through tools now in a way that give you enough depth to be almost dangerous. And so what you do after that is really important, right? Rather than say, well, I heard this podcast and it says do this, this, are you doing those things? You say, all right, now I have an understanding of how it works. You can go and have a dialogue. And I think humility is also important, and listening. If you have an expert to go to on your staff, then great. If not, it's probably also time to start finding them and think of an advisory board. So I love the format, and thank you for having me as well. But this notion that what you have to get right isn't being the best cyber person in the company, and it's approachable. You could do that if you really find a shining to it. It's about being good enough to lead and to set the strategy for an organization, because if you don't, it's never going to be a priority.
Rain, this is Seth, can I just jump in with a couple points to, I guess, emphasize that I heard? I think one way to look at it is that as a leader, partly what you want to do is to change the culture or create a culture for your employees or for your teammates, everyone you're working with, right? There's the sort of IT element, but there's also the workforce element as well. And I think we'll get to that in the second module, but creating a culture where everyone cares and they're your partners, and the mission to have good cybersecurity is important as well, in addition to the sort of budget strategy pieces. A couple of ideas, onboarding. When you're onboarding employees, that's a great time to stress the importance of cybersecurity and hygiene, or sort of the essentials, the way I think CISA is calling it. Another is if you have standing meetings with your staff or with your team, that's an opportunity to bring it up. Again, it doesn't have to be technical, right? Just as a way to bring it up as an issue so that people know that you care about it. There are other policy changes that you can make, again, with the idea that it doesn't have to be technical. There are different policy changes that you can make, something like a policy not to make changes for, kind of billing or banking to, over email, right? That you need to talk on the phone for something like that. There are ways that you can do non-technical things to get your team or your organization to be more secure around cybersecurity type issues. The final thing I wanted to mention is just based on the polls, it seems like there are a lot of folks on here who do have some expertise, or at least rate themselves as having some expertise. And so I guess what I encourage you, if you're listening, that you can help your neighbors, right? You can help your kind of sister, brother organizations if you feel like you have some expertise to help the kind of other folks in your community. I would encourage people to kind of make these partnerships if you feel like you're ahead of the game, that you can be part of helping others as well.
Yeah, I think everyone's covered it pretty much. I'll wait for the next question.
Thanks, Ron.
If there was one other thing I would add, this is Cybersecurity Month, and this is an opportunity for you to, throughout the year, it's kind of difficult to integrate or do something exciting about cybersecurity. But the month of October is really an opportunity for you as a leader to just look for a way to carve out time for the organization to think about it more broadly. And I think that's the one thing, if you haven't done anything this year except for attend these great webinars, which is a good thing, next year, be thinking ahead about what can my city or town do to celebrate cybersecurity, and then start planning toward it and make that kind of a reason to celebrate it. I think it's cheesy, but it works. It's an excuse to think about it and get it on the calendar.
Or not to jump back in again, but I think Stephanie can verify, in the military, they have this kind of leading from behind mentality sometimes too, right? Well, all of this module 1 is if you're the leader of the organization. Not everyone's a leader in the organization, but you can still influence the leadership in different ways. And October being Cybersecurity Awareness Month is an opportunity for you to make suggestions to your bosses or to the leaders to try to encourage them to take it up. And over time, it could kind of build momentum once you start doing one thing and then another, and then they, the leaders become more invested. So even if you're not a leader, I would say some of this stuff is actually still relevant.
Thank you. Anybody else on that topic, or should we look and see if we've got any questions from Kevin?
Any questions yet?
Yeah, any questions, Kevin?
Well, Seth, you stole my thunder. So the only question I was going to ask was, what can I do if I'm not the leader? I guess the next question that I see here is just kind of a more of a general question. It's just how prepared are we at the state and local level? We see these large companies getting hit with ransomware attacks and things like that. What's the general level of preparedness, and is the lack of preparedness, is it a leadership problem or is it a technology infrastructure problem?
I'll take a quick stab at it and then I'll turn it over to Ron or Seth or Sam. But I look at preparation in two manners. One is left of boom and one is right of boom. Left of boom is, what can I do to not get attacked? And there are a number of things you can think of to do, and that's through risk assessment, and the NIST format really kind of helps you think through that. But there's also the right of boom, like, okay, however it happened, I got attacked. Now I want to be able to respond agilely. The left of boom stuff, a lot of that is your cybersecurity expert. Your right of boom, a lot of that response action is more broadly your security team. You should have a plan for right of boom for what happens if you do get attacked, because the more quickly you can respond, both technically and communicating, the better off you're going to be in being able to recover from an incident. So I would say, looking at that left and right of boom, I think everybody wishes they were both on both sides of that. I see some that are focused on left of boom and trying to prepare, but haven't really thought through what they would do right of boom. And then some places are totally opposite.
And if I could give you the kind of the federal or national landscape that I've seen, between small and medium-sized municipalities and businesses, it really varies based on a lot of different things in terms of skill sets, professional training that's available to people. And I think it goes back to the first question too about a certain level of awareness. So if you're not aware of the threats that cybersecurity presents, then you don't know what you should be looking for. You don't know what you should prepare for. You don't know that if you should incorporate those things into a business continuity plan and a disaster recovery plan. So it really varies just based on just those small group of caveats on how robust and how mature the public and private sector are. I like to use the example of if you're familiar with the state fusion centers, which are the state intelligence centers. If you visited one fusion center, then you've only visited one fusion center because they're all different. So if people are familiar with the fusion centers, there's one in each state, at least one in each state. And based on the mission of that particular fusion center and the capabilities that they have, they would be drastically different than another fusion center, in the next state. So if you take that kind of example and look at it from a business perspective or from a town municipality perspective, there might be towns that are much more attuned to the threats because they have someone who has taken it upon themselves to either dedicate a certain portion of their time to learning about the threats. They're more keen and more keyed into that, into those reports and the threat, where you might have another town who they don't have someone who's dedicated like that, and they don't have the funding and the training available. So it really does depend on just the how tuned in and how adept these organizations are, whether they are public or private.
I'll chime in. I'm in the private sector, so I don't do work at the federal, state, or municipal level. But I think there's two parts to this question, in addition to what's been said so far in response. The first is, what do you do generally? And having a cyber strategy. You should have something in place, and you really should know who to call in case of emergency. Those numbers, you should know who does the calling. What does a crisis look like? What are the priorities for maintaining critical services? And I would encourage, one I will say as a private sector person, one as a citizen. As a private sector person, I would do tabletops. I would practice this, and it doesn't have to be very expensive. But as a citizen, I know that I'm a resident of Massachusetts. I would gladly help my city. And any adjacent city on a pro bono basis. I know you reach out to citizens and you get them to help with things like zoning. It's also possible you have cyber experts living right in your towns who can help. The city that I live in, which I won't go into depth, they had a cyber incident fairly recently, and I didn't know how to contact them as a cyber executive. And I could have brought a lot of resources to bear. The second thing, though, at a high level is ransomware. And I want to emphasize that because even before COVID-19, it was a growing threat targeting municipalities in a disgusting way, with increasing damage and increasing fines, or rather penalty, money they're asking for. And during COVID-19, it's targeted critical infrastructure as well. So the possibility for it to splash into municipalities and to damage those who are adjacent is huge. And so I would encourage you to specifically have a plan about ransomware in the short term. Even if you don't have the time to get a cyber plan in place, know what you're going to do, know what you will and won't pay, either for ethical reasons or for legal reasons or just in a risk trade-off. You don't want to be sitting there, what do we legally have to do and how do we handle this? So, take a long-term view, yes, but in the short term, be aware of ransomware and also that there could be some cyber activity around elections in the short term. So make sure you think about continuity through that.
Thank you. We had a question come in from Chris Carney, and he writes, to what degree is awareness a contributing factor to prioritizing the creation of a cybersecurity plan, and how do people become aware?
Start with the modules here, right?
Right.
That's the flip answer. Awareness always sounds good, but depending on where you are on the spectrum, it might mean knowing the basics. It might mean, okay, so you know the basics, how do you go a little deeper? I think as with any discipline, you can continuously improve, but there are resources available like these ones, knowing yourself, and the ones we're going to look at in a moment. So I was asked the other day, is Cybersecurity Awareness Month still worth it? And I said, absolutely. It's not just knowing the basics and don't click on that phishing email. There is much more to discuss, and it's an opportunity for us to put it back in front and center. I'm used to being on the security side, where I say the biggest problem I have is not aligning with my business colleagues throughout my industry. The reverse is true too, that cyber is alien to most business conversations, whether they're public sector or private sector. So awareness, I think, starts with what Stephanie said earlier, some podcasts, perhaps a few reading lists, and there's some well curated beginners lists as well out there. And I know that's only about half of the audience here. The other half could help the first half, by the way.
So this is Seth. I'll jump in to say, I think the awareness links pretty nicely to module 2. So this could be kind of a, way to transition. But to me, the awareness is about educating the whole team. A lot of the vectors often involve people, right? There's a lot of people-based vulnerabilities, I guess maybe one way to say it. But a lot of the bad stuff that happens is going to involve a person, right, instead of just purely technology. And so awareness is a way to bolster against those types of attacks. A plan is gonna involve that type of education and awareness, but that's not the sum total of it. So I would say it's part of it. That's how I see them fitting together anyway.
Did you have anything to add there, Ron?
Yeah, I think both Sam and Seth make some great points. Starting out with the basics, looking at, there are a lot more resources than people think there are, out in the open, source world. If you do a Google internet search and, you just want to find out the basics, there's some great resources out there, from either, the SANS Institute, or, again, it goes to the awareness piece. If you know what to look for, if you're doing just, one of the first steps in terms of doing some open source research, there's some great resources out there if people are inclined to do their research. Part of it is doing the work, right? You have to have the inclination that you're hearing these words and you're hearing this terminology a lot more frequently nowadays than you probably heard them, 4 or 5 years ago. Look at ransomware. Now, my kids know what ransomware is, and they're in middle school and elementary school, but it's become so, integrated into kind of the normal vernacular today that, people are, I think we give them a lot less credit than we probably think that we should. Whether you are a little adolescent or you are, wiser in your days, I think people are a lot more attuned than we give them credit for. So, if we're able to, ignite a little bit of passion in them, a little bit of energy and motivation to point them in the right direction, which I think was what we're doing today. I think that gets them a bit closer to understanding, what are the possible impacts to ransomware. They've heard the terminology before, but do they really understand what it could possibly do? In my personal life, I've had one of my in-laws on the phone with someone saying that, there was some infections on their laptop, and gosh, this was probably 3 or 4 years ago. And fortunately, he called me before he had done anything else. But I think we've all had some similar situations where, you've had, either relatives or friends who have been either victims or, close to being victims because they either didn't have the awareness of social engineering and phone phishing and spear phishing. But he had the awareness to call me, the resident IT guy in the family. So, but he knew that that he had a resource. So I think that it just goes back to the awareness piece. I think that's the one thing that we have to consider as we go through this conversation.
Thanks, Ron. And I see that someone's asking for a list of resources. We will have some links at the end of the webinar that you'll be able to find some more resources there. So please stay on with us here.
And Rain, I think the DHS, the CISA products all have pretty good links. I think
They do.
have, several links for each item, which, are the resource I think that people should look at first.
Right, and the e-learning modules that we have created from the CISA tools also have the direct links that are from each chapter there. So those are going to be a great resource for folks to check in with. And again, we'll have those links at the end of this webinar to share with folks. So we'll move on.
Sorry, just to jump in, it's kind of interesting moment that we're in right now where there are actually quite a few places you could look for this, right? And so you have a variety of choices, not just for paid services, but for sort of low cost, no cost services and advice. And it's almost like there's too many choices. There's sort of this cognitive overload in a way. And it's true even on the DHS, the CISA products, where they've got like 6 links for kind of the same thing. I would just say, just pick one. I mean, it doesn't even, I'm not gonna say it doesn't matter, but don't stress about it. Just pick one and go into it. And if it looks good, just start. It doesn't, there's a lot of choices, but I think the idea is to just sort of pick one and go, as opposed to, look for the best one and think about it too much. I think if you just sort of pick one and start doing stuff, you'll be in a better place.
And I think too, Seth, to build on that, that will lead you into further exploration as you start to one place, and you'll go into deeper exploration. So we'll move on now into our second module of your staff. And Ron, I thought I'd like to start with you for a question. And what are some ways to help staff become aware of the fact that they're an integral part of a new municipality's cybersecurity, and help them begin to make choices in their IT cyber environment from that knowledge point?
Yeah, I think a good starting point is, you're starting out with some level of awareness training. Companies and organizations typically have, an annual IT awareness training. That's a great start for organizations and leaders to start to incorporate cybersecurity awareness into their annual training. So at a minimum, it's fairly low cost. Probably cost you $0 just to do some Google searching and then print out some resources. You can go to our website. You can go to the CISA website, or you can go to a bunch of other different websites that people can easily just download and pass out to, to their office mates. The thing I generally think about in terms of, and Seth said it earlier, a few minutes ago, about where to start. Just starting from anywhere, whether it's going onto our website or going to your town's or your government, the government website is also great. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts has a lot of good resources there as well. But, long story short, I think in terms of staying motivated, staying determined, looking at the resources that we're going to avail to people now. With Cybersecurity Awareness Month being this month, and there's a lot of emphasis on information sharing. There tends to be a bit of overload, as Seth mentioned, but it's all with good intent. It's all to provide people with as many different resources that they are able to take in and receive. But it doesn't stop here. It doesn't stop with just Cybersecurity Month. It continues on. So looking at having, one-off special, events, whether it's, a lunch and learn, which I've seen a lot of different organizations start to have, just doing a 30-minute, half an hour lunch and learn or a brown bag, aside from the annual IT awareness, training that they take part in, each year. I think those are great one-offs because it takes people out of their comfort zone where, they're not necessarily anticipating having, another IT-oriented awareness briefing, but it's something that's focused on some actionable things, such as, the things we're going to go through today and, the upcoming, webinars that you have, Rain, as well. Those are some of the things that I think, that help to kind of make this special and unique, as compared to your general IT awareness training, which, you have to, do a little bit of checking the checkbox. But, when it comes to helping people understand what ransomware is and what phishing is, you might need to have special one-off events that will help to, accentuate or punctuate the importance of this. So, those conferences and those workshops, I think, are really beneficial to those small and medium-sized organizations that might not necessarily have the funding allocation or the professional training in place to really carry out some of this. So helping them along the way where, I love to present to people. I never try to say no, as you know, Rain. But, as long as I'm helping to carry forward the message, I think it's incumbent upon us as well to continue to reach out to organizations. We all are trying to further the cause to help to reduce the likelihood of impacts and reduce the impact, of organizations. So I think it's incumbent upon us as well. We can't necessarily just put the ownership on, the small organizations that might be interested. I think we continue this conversation and we continue this activity to continue to reach out to these different associations that, might not have had cybersecurity on their short list, but, you never know where the conversation might lead, where they're looking for this. It just wasn't on their list.
I'll jump in, Rain. I think the important piece here is to just make sure that your staff, right? Your staff understand their role here, and a little bit goes a long way in the sense that if you have staff that are security aware and vigilant, that actually goes quite a long way. If you think about it from the perspective of the bad guy, right? There's cheap and easy ways to do what they want to do. If you can run a social engineering scam and get someone to give you their password, then that's easy, right? It doesn't require that much right? Or if you get someone to click on a link that lets you in to the network, that's easy. Or if people aren't updating their systems and there's a known vulnerability that's published, and you can get in through that, that's easy. You don't need to do some, super like, super villain kind of cyber hacking stuff if someone's just going to let you in the front door. And that's usually what they try. And so these all rely on people. And so I think if you can communicate the degree to which you protect yourselves by having everyone aware and vigilant, I think that can help, right? It's probably the best thing you can do. I would mention just one other thing, right? So, multi-factor authentication kind of helps with the password issue. People understanding not to click on links and attachment files if they're not expecting them. Updating software updates when they come through, and having some kind of policy around USBs, right? Putting USBs into your computers, or if you lose it, right? If you lose your data that way, but you can introduce a lot of insecurity by putting devices into the network. So just those, I think, 4 things kind of get you pretty far.
This is Sam. The module also included towards the end a mention of being aware of current events, and I mentioned the election earlier. It's not the only thing. That there is a certain cadence to the year. There are threats the bad guys will try to piggyback on, like what's happening with COVID-19, of course. But I think it's important to be aware of that, and awareness will get you so far, and it's really important to do it. I think you get huge advantages from doing it. But you can also, you've got to avoid, once you've done the training, it goes stale, right? And so end users who, what you really want is to tap into that spidey sense when something's off about an email or about something that comes in or a phone call or the social engineering. And the only way you do that is if you practice it, right? So once you've done the awareness, for relatively inexpensively, you can, or even yourself, you can try to simulate attacks. And if you can, get away from just punishing the bad behavior. You can reward the good behavior. So if you do some dry runs against an organization, you test and see who's clicking on things, what %. After an awareness training, then when you have a meeting, you can say, hey, I just want to call out so-and-so for saving the organization because she stopped a phishing attack or even caught the simulated attack. In the private sector, sometimes we give spot bonuses, and for the win, sometimes there are even some companies out there. Mine isn't one of them, but there are companies out there that will gamify this so that it becomes interactive. That end users are like, I'm trying to get it. You want to make them listen to that spidey sense more in the moment, because that's the moment when they're like, should I help this person? Should I open this thing? Versus, ooh, I think I have an opportunity to get points or to avoid something terrible happening or to get recognition. If you can find ways to stimulate that after awareness, then I would do it. And if you can, we even tried internally in my company. We said that let's not do the 1 hour. We have what you have to do for compliance, but let's not do the 1 hour, required cyber awareness month, webinar internally or panel in an all hands meeting. Instead, we said, let's put little 5-minute vignettes in a series of them. And let's do breakouts where people can opt in to go to them and say, hey, if you were curious about this subject about ransomware, we'll actually show some so you can see how it works. And people really seem to have responded and lent into it. So my advice is, yes, do the awareness, get that, but then try to reinforce it in a way that isn't just onerous or yet another checklist and yet another thing to pay attention to. And if you can, even get into the testing it, rewarding the good, not just a stick, but a carrot, and then gamifying for the win. But the budgets, of course, can make that more difficult.
I would say also, you kind of have to look at, the cyber threat is different from different parts of your organization. So in particular, finance, those folks are under a barrage because that's where the money is. So, we used to do these things in the Navy, stand downs where you would take, half a day and say, okay, we're not doing our regular work. We're going to focus on this topic. And here's, where you can not only promote awareness, but that whole vigilance aspect of, well, what ways could they get into us? And I've heard, some towns have said that they got taken by, this strategy, or, well, if they did it this way, we would never find out and we could preclude that. I mean, making that not across the organization, one size fit all, but taking a look at where your high risk, high value cybersecurity threats, are probably most aimed at, and letting those folks be a part of the team that helps counter the cyber attack. And that goes a long way. And as Sam said, try not to punish, try to reward. I know a city which will rename nameless, they have those phishing tests that go through, and every 6 months they announce a winner of a department that had the highest compliance. So if somebody was 100%, then maybe they got a pizza party for lunch back in the days when people actually came to work and ate in a common area, but they would either have a pizza party or they would have something that would reward that department for their good, detection of the phishing attack. Things like that do go a long way, I think, to create a positive environment, but you're also focusing on work centers, because then you're putting a work center leader to engage their co-workers for the larger organization. And I think that's a useful strategy.
Thank you all for that. Kevin, did we have any questions from this round?
Yeah, kind of a quick one. Just if somebody explain the difference between a vulnerability assessment and then actual penetration testing.
I can take a stab at that. So penetration testing is usually done with an active red team. It can be done in an automated way. And the purpose is to find out which pathways actually lead to results. In other words, it's how do you connect the vulnerabilities in chains to achieve something. Along the way, it will tell you vulnerabilities. But a vulnerability report is usually a scan. It can be either host-based or network-based, and it will come back and say, this version of this software was found at this level, and it has these known weaknesses, tick, 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 tick. That is an input into a process normally that should be as close to automated as you can get it to close those. Now, you don't automate them immediately because the patches can shut things down. It's complex when you've got hundreds of pieces of software in an environment, and patch levels lead to incompatibilities and things breaking. In other words, full automation, if it's not done in a rigorous way, can lead to help desk tickets and loss of availability. So the vulnerability management scans, or the vulnerability scans, they produce grocery lists of things to be aware of. A pen test is usually a more structured attempt to actually see what's practical in an environment. And if any of my colleagues want to add or remove to what I said, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I'll add. I'll give you kind of a good example or kind of analogy to think about. So the vulnerability scans, you would equate them to someone not nefarious coming in or jiggling your door handles on your house and checking to make sure that your windows are locked. Those tend to be the good people. They'll tell you, what's going on. So if you have a burglar alarm system or a security company that comes in, and they'll check around and see, what is possibly, deficient or what's a vulnerability. I would say that the red teams are more of the burglars who they know what they're doing. They know what they want to try and exploit to a certain degree. They don't know a lot of the different things that, you're doing to lock down your house. So they don't know that you have, guard dogs inside. They don't know that you have, lasers inside your house that will trigger alarms and all these different things. So they're trying to poke and prod as much as they can, and whatever way that they'll try to get in is the way that they'll try to get in. And as Sam highlighted, they will use whatever the process is that they find out, whether it's sequential or whether they've been able to pivot around to figure out what's the best way for them to get in, And so if you look at that as, as a house, they might jiggle a handle, but they also might break a window because they know that the window is only single pane, not double pane. And so, and then they'll, weasel their way around and figure out where the crown jewels are. Same with a red team assessment. They're going to figure out what's the best route that they can get to get to the most important assets as well. So that's kind of the analogy that I use.
Thanks, Ron. And I see in the chat that Chris Carney asked another really good question, but that feels to me like it's more a question for Module 3. So I'm going to hold that until we get into Module 3 a little bit, which is your systems. And why don't we kick off with Chris's question, and then we can come back to the other questions I have if you folks don't go in there on your own with your conversations, which you've been doing really well here today. So I'm gonna shoot this Chris's question over to Seth first. And cybersecurity tends to be associated with IT as a perception. To what degree do you think physical security plays a role?
Well, there's a couple ways to answer this, but I mean, I think if you're going to take a holistic view, you have to incorporate a variety of things into kind of a comprehensive cybersecurity approach. Obviously, IT is going to be part of it, but there's physical security, there's operational things if you're talking about critical infrastructure. And I mean, I'm going to editorialize a little bit, but I think the field is a little bit fragmented at times, and you have kind of the IT people talking about cybersecurity, and you have the other fields as well. I think, again, this is just, I don't know how much this ultimately is going to relate to the module here, but I think where the field is going to need to go is to try to bring some of these different subdisciplines together and have kind of expert communities talking so that there's more integrated approaches coming out of it. But I think for the short term, I think the challenge for us is to make sure that the especially in the kind of public safety domain, that the physical security folks are absolutely part of the broader cybersecurity conversation. You might have networked cameras as part of physical security at your facility. Are those part of, if you're doing a kind of audit of all the systems, is that part of the audit? Do you have, do you know what you'll do in the event that those cameras are not functioning as intended? Maybe, someone's attacking them, or maybe they have, they're open to the open web or something like that. What are you doing? Are you working with your vendor or not? I think, absolutely the idea that you bring in here, Chris, to make sure that you're accounting for sort of the technology that you're using in physical security as part of your broader approach makes absolutely a lot of sense to me. Be curious to hear what other panelists have to say.
Anybody else have anything on that specific question, or should I go into?
It's such a huge topic. I take the perspective of, well, who are you worried about, and what eventualities are you worried about? And of course, that presupposes to some degree that you thought about it as an organization. Some will have and some won't. But the adversary will use any combination of techniques that is going to get them to their result. Some of them are financially motivated, so they're going to be efficient. They're not necessarily going to take advantage of physical weaknesses, but really the goals are human, right? That somebody's looking to make money off you. Somebody's looking to gain some insight. They're looking to embarrass. They're looking to deny a service. That could be geopolitical. It could be criminal. It could be local vandals, for instance. So not all actors or not all threat vectors are going to go after physical to compromise you. But you should be doing some kind of annual simple exercise where you sit down and say, what are we worried about? And that's not perfect, but it'll give you some insight into what degree physical needs to be prioritized. It's definitely part of the equation, but it usually falls very low, because I think what we've seen is international threats from international organizations that are now coming down to the local level. But that doesn't mean that you should ignore the potential for fraud at a town level or at a state level, and local criminals using cyber tools. Last year during Cyber Awareness Month, it was also Domestic Violence Appreciation or Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I was shocked to find out, for instance, that most classic most classic stalkers, take the word cyber out, use cyber tools. Meaning cyber is a domain for criminals and for organizations of all stripes to abuse. And so I think the question on the physical side is, it is part of the equation. You must think about it, but it doesn't, where it falls on your priority list will be very highly idiosyncratic. It will depend on what your town is like, what your local businesses are like, which threats you're worried about, which ones you are less worried about. And that's a conversation rather than a, oh yeah, it falls exactly here on the list. So I would just emphasize that you get into a dialogue about risks, not for fear, just like, what are we worried about collectively? If you do it on a monthly, a quarterly, an annual basis, then I think the answer will fall out as to how important it is for you. And that's a risk conversation. It's not an esoteric or steeped in the art conversation. By all means, bring cyber people in, bring law enforcement in, bring peers in, but I don't think there's a hard and fast rule for it.
I think it's related when we talk about cybersecurity as people, processes, and technology. I usually use the example for processes that has more of a physical component to it, not all of it, but things like making sure your server room is locked and making sure that you know who goes into the server room and that they're authorized. Making sure you know where your backups are protected, because it's the physical security against fire and water damage, as well as somebody who's intending to actually steal your backup tapes or discs or whatever you've got there. So I think it's related. And when you look through, how do I build a cybersecurity plan? And I look at, what do I need to do for people? What do I need to do for processes? And where should I spend my money on technology? It is a personal evaluation, as Sam said, and you do need to kind of figure out what am I most worried about protecting, and where's my biggest risk coming from?
And another aspect of systems that I think quite a few towns have probably had to deal with or are recognizing that they need to deal with is that different departments have been able to independently purchase hardware and software and connect that into the network. So how do you get a handle on legacy systems and prevent new rogue systems and software from being added into a network? How do you get a control onto that?
I dealt with that a lot in the Navy over the years, because it was very difficult to try to get systems, state-of-the-art systems. And so, as you can imagine, technology evolved quite a bit. And as people were getting ready to go on deployment, somebody would stop into Radio Shack, if anybody remembers a Radio Shack, and they're like, hey, I found this thing and it does this. And we've been trying to get one of those for years. And look, I can get it for $150. So we'll buy 4 of them, right? And put them on the ship and woohoo, we're set. And then that joy of having that technology just introduced a vulnerability that people were either not aware of, or more importantly, there was some sort of sustainment to keeping these systems viable that people sometimes ignored. And so then they became hugely out of date and hugely vulnerable, especially if they were tied to networks. So I don't think municipalities are all that different. Over the years, people found something cool that they could bring in that would make life a lot easier. And it's through no, malice of forethought. It is trying to get technology to help you do a tough job. There are a lot of things you can do. And I think this is a very important thing for people to recognize, because you cannot protect what you don't know you have. So you have to have an understanding of what are my hardware, what is my software, and what are the things that are just asking for a cyber attack to happen. Something that's really, really old, using an old Windows, module or whatever, and just recognizing that those things need to go away, and you just need to improve and transition into something that is defendable. So that's kind of a painful process. Hopefully folks have recognized that they've got to do a good inventory. They have to understand how to update that. The other thing I would say is, again, when you talk about cybersecurity and processes, the process has to be in place that you can't buy new equipment unless the IT director signs off on it and the cybersecurity guy signs off on it. Cybersecurity guy or gal. You may think that sounds easy, but I would say, for example, recent things that I've heard, like, oh yeah, my town does that, no problem, except somebody went to a conference and found this Internet of Things where we can connect all these cameras and all these sensors, and we can, save money by not having physical, police patrol by doing all this wiring things. And nobody ever thought about what the cybersecurity vulnerability it might be introducing into the network. So there are a lot of things that are happening, purchases today, that you don't recognize that could potentially be a cybersecurity risk. I just say, think through how you do your purchasing today so that you can get a handle of how that new equipment is coming on board. And do you have an idea of life cycle maintenance and life cycle protection for it?
Guy, I'm going to advise crawl, walk, run. Simply knowing, let's say, first do the purchasing thing that Stephanie just mentioned, and then inventory, even if it's you keeping an inventory. But at some point, you have to go and do discovery. And actually, one of the biggest problems in IT for the last 30 years has been, do you really know what you have, legitimately have, that has been authorized? Most companies never get to 100% in evaluating that. So for a town that probably grew because somebody who was good mechanically and had some understanding of computers started to put up the first server and then added more to it and then built a larger server group and de facto became the IT person. I know there's some out there. It's hard to say now you're going to have to put some change management in place and some controls. The really hard thing, though, is where's the rogue thing that somebody brought into a building and plugged in or attached to the Wi-Fi? And there are tools to do detection there, but now that's even going a step further. Here's the nightmare, though. You're going to get an embedded component in some common piece of software that has a killer vulnerability in it, right? You're going to get a heartbleed. You're going to get something that leads to catastrophic damage or privilege escalation, somebody getting in and getting full control and having the run of the place. And at some point, you're going to need a system when you get to a sufficient size and sufficient magnitude, what's tied into things throughout the city. You're going to need to be able to say, well, where does that embedded component exist? And what's my strategy for mitigating how it can be used against us or damaged? And now, by the way, I just have to say, during COVID, so many things are being managed from home. So many things are now in an entirely new footprint that we're seeing schools get overwhelmed when kids try to log in and there's too much going over the Wi-Fi and the backbone has to be upgraded. We're seeing, we kept IoT, the Internet of Things, we kept that out of enterprises and we kept that out of offices. Well, the offices went to the IoT. And there's a whole bunch of things like old printer vulnerabilities and old router vulnerabilities that I think in the next few months, now is the time to embrace the basic set of challenges and build some relationships with some vendors for how you're going to manage your IT. And then you start to tackle the next stage. But my big concern is what happens when home automation exploits start to come out and 50 to 80% of your workforce is working from their living room or from their dining room, right? So I'd say crawl, walk, run. Don't let people scare you about all the things that could be done. Like I just might have scared you, I didn't mean to, but instead tackle the basics, and you don't have to do it all, right? Just pay attention to what's happening in the wider world.
And if I could combine both Stephanie's and Sam's thoughts, in terms of the crawl, walk, run, and then understanding what's on your network, is that between those two things, you have to organize yourself in terms of, you have to define a process that you're going to use to determine what's on the network, what's not, delineate between the two, document, those assets on the network, and then take it a step further in terms of the crawl, walk, run. Then you start to look at, are they assigned to different people, and what's the access permissions for these particular systems or data. So in terms of the crawl, walk, run, where you're looking at what's the minimum thing that you should do, it's document. It's trying to figure out what's on the network so that you can start to figure out and focus on what are the key things that this particular system or this particular platform is providing for the office or for the organization. So I like to combine the two between what Stephanie highlighted and what Seth highlighted in terms of kind of looking at maturity, based on, again, your awareness. And I think we're going to kind of foot stomp is the awareness piece, throughout this entire conversation, is how aware do you think you are versus reality? And how do you start to close in that gap so that you can move the organization forward in being more resilient?
Can I just jump in real quickly? I think, in module 3, if you're going to pick one thing to do, which I guess is the theme I'm stressing, the inventory makes a lot of sense. I just want to make sure that people are aware that there are, again, no-cost tools out there. I think the Center for Internet Security has an inventory tool that you can start with. There's probably others. There's some links on the DHS document. I think if you go through, you'll find there's help, right? You're not starting from zero. If this is what you're going to focus on, there are tools out there for free that you can use to kind of get you going.
Thank you all very much for that conversation. And wondering, Kevin, if we have any questions or if there's anybody who would like to ask a question person to person or in the chat.
Yeah, we had a question that was, the list of what someone who's a leader here or part of our municipal organization has to do is like never ending. How do you know when you're done, or maybe not done, but how do you know when you've got to where you need to feel comfortable? What does that milestone look like?
I would say I have been quoted, my boss even quoted me back to me today. It's not one and done with cybersecurity. It's not a line item that you can write a check and then you're done. So you're right. It is an ongoing, it has to be a priority. You try to keep it fresh. I don't know that you ever get that sense that you're kind of there, because I think right when you get that sense, somebody will prove that you're wrong. So I would just say, try to do the best you can. And the fact that you're doing anything about it is probably better than, 50% of people, which is doing nothing about it. Right. So that's my thinking.
So I was asked by a journalist once, he said, so when will we finally solve the security thing? This was a German journalist. And I had a cultural, like, why am I being asked this question for a moment? I had a CIO once ask me likewise, what's the one new rack mountable box? What's the price tag on it to make this problem go away? And that's because for the most part, most things we deal with in IT are, we don't have an adaptive opponent. We don't have somebody who's trying to, actively break the system. Nature's the enemy. It's a failed part. It's a reliability thing. We get to the 5 nines, right? You tune it and you tune it and you tune it. And if you don't change anything and leave it alone, it hums. It's a machine. And you sort of build processes to make sure the machine stays highly tuned and highly functioning. But we have an active and adaptive opponent. Not only that, we have a changing landscape. So I think on the one hand, I'll give you the bad news and the good news. The bad news is it's never done. until we ultimately get an artificial intelligence to do this for us, and we haven't solved the Turing challenge yet. And if we had one, it might get bored with this job. But on the flip side, the good news is you don't have to do everything. That rather, just as you would, when would you, imagine if your CFO or your, town council said, let's take a company example, because that's what I know best. They said, hey, so when are we finally gonna be done with litigation? Or when are we finally gonna be done with having competitors? It's like, no, in those worlds, you have an adaptive human opponent. And the way that you deal with it is you have a regular dialogue. What is the litigation landscape for a large organization looking like? What is the competition looking like for a business? And you regularly talk about it. You don't panic. You find strategies that make the risk acceptable and you move ahead. And it's the same thing here. Cyber is one of those things, unlike a lot of other things in the company, that requires a regular discussion of the current risk landscape. And unless you're in a crisis, and even then you should practice it, you don't really reach a point where you say, we're done. And so you set the expectation for, hey, and just like I bring you, you get a weather report for this, for any given week, so you can plan. I'm going to come and talk to you every month and tell you how the risk registry has changed, what's looking worse, what's looking better, what we have to pay attention to, what we don't. And that's a regular dialogue thing rather than a full stop anywhere.
Can I just say, I think Sam's absolutely right. I think it's a risk-based question. No one's ever going to say, okay, we're done, we can move on. But in terms of, have you addressed the risks and do you have a plan? The other thing I would add is, one, if you're in this place and you're kind of wondering, it seems like the question is wondering kind of where we are, like in the big picture, having some kind of peer interactions, right? Interacting with your local peers and asking them where they are can give you a little bit of a sense for like whether you're on track or not, or kind of are you in the same place as others. And if you're behind, you can ask for help, and if you're ahead, you can offer help. And I think that's a way to kind of move everybody along and give you a sense for like where are we in the kind of risk spectrum, is to talk to your peers, kind of have like a local interest group, some kind of interaction with like-minded folks.
So Rain will know where I'm going with this, but for the Cyber Resilient Massachusetts Working Group, we've talked about promoting regionalization with a small r, regionalization of working groups so that you all could get together and do exactly what Seth says. Share information, friendly, we're all in this together, we're geographically nearby, I may call upon you if I have an incident, but it does help you start that dialogue amongst your peers about where are we, and more importantly, in a safe environment, share what you've heard about threat activity, because people are very uncomfortable talking about how they were attacked and what the details were on how somebody successfully got into their system. Regional working groups, I think, are a way to go, and I would highly encourage the Homeland Security Councils to continue that effort, which I know that they're thinking of doing. So I would just shout out to them on that.
Thank you. Kevin, any other question? I think we have time for about one more. Or anybody who wants to raise your hand or speak up, you're welcome to.
Nobody else has fired anything to me, and you guys have answered the couple ringers that I had in waiting. So
All right. I think then we'll just move to any final words of wisdoms from each of our panelists here before we wrap up for the day.
I can go first. I think, for those that are new to cybersecurity, it looks like, half of you, have a general sense. I would say don't be discouraged. Using the Cyber Essentials Toolkit is one of the ways that, at least, between the federal government and CISA, we are trying to make this information digestible and much more straightforward, where 10, 15 years ago, for the average citizen, it probably felt very foreign and very alien to understand just from a fundamental baseline what cybersecurity is. Nowadays, because we have a lot more access to information, things are a little bit more simplistic and much more, understandable. When we look at, how the landscape has changed for people and for organizations to really start to get a better understanding, I think the Cyber Essentials Toolkit is a step forward for CISA and for the federal government to help to bridge that gap. This is our first time doing this. I think we're up to chapter 5 that's been released officially. So stay tuned for chapter 6. But this type of engagement, I think all of us here, on the phone call here between public and private sector organizations, it just goes to show you how passionate we are about this. We are here to ensure that the information that we can pass along and share is digestible. We also say it's actionable, so you can actually use this for your organization or even in your personal life. So I would say, feel free to continue to ask questions, to be proactive, to be curious about this, because we can only do better with the feedback that we can get from this. So if you have critiques or edits or comments about the CISA Cyber Essentials or anything else that resonates with you, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you so much, Rain.
I'll go next. Echoing Ron, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. If we can be of assistance, I know from speaking personally, I will happily lend my help wherever possible and help you connect to the right people. We're a pretty warm community, I think. It might be intimidating, but you can do this. And for those of you who are experienced or inexperienced, this is a leadership role. And a good reminder to anybody who's in a leadership role is that it's fundamentally a human solution, right? I think I talked earlier about the human opponent, but it's a logistical thing. It's a leadership thing. It's about not panicking. It is about having a plan, and it is crawl, walk, run. So good luck with it. This is very doable, and we are all here to help.
Hey, I'll jump in. This is Seth. Just want to thank everyone for participating. I hope this was useful. I know that there's another module coming up, and so encourage you to join. I'll be on that. Thank you to Rain for setting this up and for the councils. Hopefully this has been valuable. I think we all would welcome feedback from everyone. I totally agree with what's been said before about, we're all here, we're all part of the community. I just arrived, but we're here to help, and so feel free to ask us questions. The one thing I just want to kind of end on is, I think this is an interesting time for cybersecurity. I think the threats are probably, this is as high as they've been, but there are so many resources and tools, and thank you to CISA for putting together the essentials. I think it's really helpful compilation of advice and links. I think this is a great time to get started. And so that's kind of what I would say, is to kind of, if you're at that place where you're looking to get started, to pick something and get going. You can get pretty far in the crawl, walk, run. Crawling gets you really far in this, right? And if you can do the basics, you're pretty good. There's always, you're never done, but doing the basics gets you pretty far. And so would encourage people to just kind of get started and let us know if you have questions. Thanks again.
I would say thank you again to Rain and to the rest of the councils for putting this together, because I do think it's helpful to have something in one place. I've always been asked what's the 3 or 4 things I would recommend somebody do if they were getting started, and my answer is always have a plan. It's not the plan in and of itself that's important. It's the process of planning, where you start learning about people's roles and responsibilities. What resources do you have available? What do I really need to protect? The the planning process is a journey that will get you pretty far down the road. And I would just recommend you take a look at the MassCyberCenter.org website. We've got materials from the municipal incident response planning workshops posted there. There's easy PowerPoints for you to follow. There's a template, there's a checklist. I mean, we've got it all there, hopefully to get you started. And again, whether you want to go to sending CISA feedback or to us feedback, we're all in this for the long run. And I can tell you this is a priority for all of the leadership in the state of Massachusetts. So we're going to continue to help you as we can and let us know where we can be more helpful.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. And I also want to remind folks that the Homeland Security Councils have created online e-learning modules that walk you through the cyber essentials. So some ways it even makes the CISA essentials even more simple than the PDF, what you find in the PDF and the web page. And those are available on all the Homeland Security Council websites. So we'll put those links in the chat for you so you can see those. You can follow any one of those links and find the modules there that will take you through a step-by-step walkthrough of the cyber essentials. And also we're going to have another webinar next week, which is going to focus on the next 3 chapters of the essentials. And that's going to be on Tuesday, October 27th. And again, there's information about that webinar on the all the Homeland Security Council websites. And if we could also just put into the chat the MassCyberCenter.org link and the CISA link there for people to copy out. And there you can find a lot of resources on both of those pages. And especially now that it's Cyber Awareness Month, there's a lot of special things put on each of those websites. So I think we have wrapped up for today, and a big thank you to all of our panelists, to Stephanie and Ron and Sam and Seth. Thank you so much for being here. It was great to have you all just kind of talk this through and share your experiences and insights from your long careers in cybersecurity. Thank you all very much. And thank you all the participants who are here with us today and listening into our conversation.